This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. The other thing people are Googling, no doubt, but also seeing across the news a lot this week was Donald Trump starting to appoint his team.
Yep. We both have a pretty good working knowledge of US politics, particularly at the moment, coming off the back of a presidential election. We've been pretty engaged in the news and the content, but we've got some friends who are really deep into this. Certainly I got a number of text messages and emails and, on the messaging apps about, wow, what's happened this week is huge. And if you're anything like me, it's just a list of names without much context.
Until you know a bit more about it.
It just takes a little bit to dig into it.
So let's start with, I guess, who these people are and why it's important. They are the people who will make up key figures in the Trump administration when he takes the White House in January next year. From who will be, so there's a sort of his chief of staff, which we've talked about, Susie Wiles, key advisors through to his cabinet. They're his kind of ministers, I guess, in the equivalent scenario in Australia.
Yeah, they're called secretaries. So it's a bit different because not only are they political appointments, but they also run the department. So I'm trying to think of a departmental secretary, I guess, here in Australia that some people might know. Let's take Stephen Kennedy. So he's the Treasury Secretary here in Australia. He runs the Treasury Department. Of course, we have Treasurer Jim Chalmers as well. So the US equivalent of these appointments is that there would be no Stephen Kennedy. Jim Chalmers would be the guy who not only reports to the leader, but also runs the department.
So they aren't elected. I mean, that sort of analogy works, except that Jim Chalmers is an elected official and these people are not necessarily elected officials. They're literally anyone the president decides.
Anyone the president decides, but the Senate has to give the tick to. So there is that sort of political overlay, I guess. They have to be approved by the Congress.
Which Donald Trump's party, the Republican Party, is in charge of. There is a chance that a handful of Republicans could say, well, no, we don't
like
agree.
That guy, yeah.
But whether that happens or not, we will wait and see. It's not impossible, though. But either way, the point being, it's likely these people will be in charge of these departments. So let's run through them. Matt Gaetz for Attorney General was the first one to point out, I guess.
Yep. So Matt Gaetz, a really key appointment because Attorney General is such a key appointment in the government. Until this week, he was a congressman. He's a hardcore Trump fan, a loyalist from Florida. And that, of course, is where Trump has been based for the last 4 years. So they've got to know each other pretty well. As Attorney General, he will lead the Department of Justice.
Why is he controversial?
He's controversial because, I guess, a case that has been very much in the news in the US. He was accused of having a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old. He was under investigation by the Justice Department for trafficking. That essentially was an accusation that he travelled with this girl and had a sexual relationship with her. Also, there have been claims of illicit drug use, improper gifts receiving, sort of taking political donations and using them for his own benefit, other offences as well. He's quit, though, his job in the Congress, so a lot of those investigations go away.
Because they were investigations by a congressional committee, and he's quit the Congress to take up the job of Attorney General. He denies any of that. He says that none of that is true, and, I guess given they won't be investigating it anymore, that's sort of the end of it.
Yep.
One of the ways he's been described is Trump's wrecking ball.
Trump's wrecking ball, and you only have to look at what Gaetz said this week. He sent out, just before this announcement was made, a tweet. He said, "We ought to have a full press against the weaponised government that has been turned against our people." So the sort of little context to that is Donald Trump feels like the Department of Justice came after him very unfairly. So this weaponising of government to pursue a political agenda. He went on to say, if that means abolishing every one of the 3-letter agencies, I'm ready to get going.
It's funny, just looking at this, he's weaponised is in capitals and abolishing is in capitals. It's very Trump-esque. Yeah. By 3-letter agencies, he means things like the FBI and the CIA. So that's a discussion about Trump's ambition to sort of dismantle what he calls the deep state, these institutions that are inherently against his agenda, he believes. The next two appointments to call out are very much down that line as well. Pete Hegseth, who's going into defence, and Tulsi Gabbard. She will be the Director of National Intelligence.
So we'll start with Hegseth. He's a veteran. He was a major in the Minnesota National Guard. He served as a prison guard at the Guantanamo Bay Detention Centre. He also served in Iraq and Afghanistan. These days, he's a Fox News host. He's written a best-selling book as well that really called for the purge of generals who currently run the American military. He says that that's because he really disagrees with their woke diversity policies. His critics say that he's a very unlikely pick because he has minimal managerial experience. The US military is huge. Huge.
Millions and millions?
Yeah. Millions. So
not millions and millions. 1.3 million active duty service members and nearly 1 million civilian staff.
It's really,
that's millions and millions.
It's really big. So the general vibe there is he's a Fox News host. Is he really up to this?
Yeah, out of the blue best describes the reaction. As for Tulsi Gabbard, she's a former Democrat and Iraq War veteran. Trump would like to appoint her, as I said, as the Director of National Intelligence. That is, I guess, what many say is Trump's greatest adversary within the US government.
Yep, and she's another unlikely pick. I guess her backstory is worth shouting out. She was a Democratic congresswoman until 2021, so for the opposite side. She quit that party. She's a critic, though, of the warmongering US foreign policy. She calls it warmongering. So she's really very much in line with that Trump agenda of scaling back out of some of those conflicts. She's also been accused by Hillary Clinton of being very cozy with Russia.
Yeah, so if Trump's going to follow through on this scaling back of global conflicts, Gabbard and Hegseth seem to be his people. You can kind of see the alignment there.
Absolutely right.
Talking about his people, Elon Musk, Claire, that was a thing. That is a thing. It's been a thing for a little while. And look, it's more of a thing every day.
And could go on and on. Like, that's a get a glass of wine and go, wow. Yeah. Like, what's that all about? But Musk and the former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, they've been announced co-captains, I guess, of a new outfit called the Department of Government Efficiency. As Trump put it, together, these two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy / excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditure and restructure federal agencies.
And it's not exactly clear how it will work in practice, how, you know, they're going to go to the office full time and run a whole department of people, or how that's actually going to work.
Exactly.
But it does speak to Trump's agenda, which was all of those things as a cost-saving measure and a way to, you know, get rid of red tape across the US. So that's what they'll be in charge of. Just as we record the podcast, there's been another announcement. Robert F. Kennedy will be his health secretary.
And, of course, he's the guy who ran for president as an independent before he pulled out and backed Trump. Let's just say that he's a skeptic of mainstream health.
He was anti-vax during COVID, or pro-choice around vaccinations, depending on how you look at it.
We talked about pretty anti-vax.
We talked about him in. He was the guy with the what
bear.
Was it, a deer, a bear.
The bear that he dumped in Central Park because he likes taking roadkill off the side of the road and skinning it down and putting it in his freezer.
I don't even know if we should include this part in the podcast because it's too confusing for people who haven't listened to the episode where we actually explain that. I don't know.
It's worth clocking.
He's a character.
Go and Google it if you didn't hear it.
He's a character. I mean, he has been labelled, and we talked about this at the time, as a conspiracy theorist. And I think I made the point, it depends if you agree with his conspiracies or not.
Exactly.
But look, that announcement's just come through. There have been other appointments announced this week that are sort of less controversial.
Yeah, more conventional people who do have background and have had big jobs in the past to run some of these very big agencies and departments. But essentially the overall tone is that it's about tearing it all down from the inside.
And changing everything.
And that is exactly what Trump said that he wanted to do.
As we said at the start, this all still needs to be confirmed by the Senate.